All right, welcome everybody to an interesting session that may or may not attract people after a lunch on the last day. Thank you, audience, for coming. Actually, the number of speakers, yeah, the audience just about outnumbers the number of speakers at the moment, so that's good. And the idea of this session was this group of people here, the panelists, have all been involved with scaling up electric cooking on a grid. Now, I know the conference is about off-grid, but we thought if you could learn from what's been happening on the grid side of things regarding electric cooking, and then in my opinion, there's a tipping point coming where the off-grid has become affordable and is viable. So the first section of this workshop are the panelists just talking about what they've been doing, and then we're going to have audience participation, but perhaps not just sticking your hand up. The reason all the chairs are on wheels is because we're going to stand up, push them all to one side, and then you're going to stand on a scale of strongly agree and strongly disagree, and then I'm going to interview you why you're standing in the position you're standing. So, the first step is to let the panelists go, but Will is just going to give a very short slide presentation for context.
Thank you, Simon. Hi everyone, I'm Will Clements. I work with Simon at MEX, and I'm the link researcher for Uganda. I'll just wait for the slide operator to be ready to switch to the next slide. But yeah, I just want to set the scene a little bit by introducing a really useful concept for thinking about scaling up e-cooking. So yeah, next slide please, thank you. So MEX has a theory of change, a theory of how to change towards modern energy cooking. But that kind of implies a certain linearity. So if we do this, and then that, and then this, and then that, then we'll get there. But actually, it's not like that. So it's a really complex system, and obviously varies from country to country. And so what we think is a more appropriate concept is a jigsaw, a puzzle. And all of the pieces within this really complex system need to be in place, need to fit together for e-cooking to be able to scale. So to introduce the concept a little bit further, onto the next slide please. There are three core areas of the jigsaw framework, and yeah, as we've written here, the jigsaws and their solutions are really location specific, and everything needs to be in place. Next slide please, Naluwagga. So the first area, the enabling environment, obviously extremely important. So what policy is there in the country regarding cooking, e-cooking, electricity, and what policy could be put in place? So in Uganda, e-cooking is already being seen as a solution on a policy level in terms of reducing biomass usage for cooking and making good use of the generated electricity. But what more can be done? And we're going to hear a lot about that. What more in terms of policy and strategy can be done? And also the tariff. So what's the tariff like? What's the tariff structure like, and how conducive is it to e-cooking? And how cheap is it to cook with electricity in Uganda? And some research that we're going to hear about, conducted by CREEC, has actually shown that cooking with electricity is cheaper by up to 50% compared to charcoal. And that leads me on to the next slide, please, towards consumer awareness and consumer preferences. So even if everything's in place, if people don't want to use e-cooking appliances, then they won't. You know, these appliances need to fit within cultural cooking practices. It needs to be convenient to cook with them, as well as cost-effective. So there's been a lot of great research going on that, with really great results. We're going to hear about that. But then, with that message, how do we raise awareness, you know, among people? How do we change people's perceptions and bring that message home that e-cooking is convenient and cost-effective? And there's been a lot of activity around that as well, with exhibitions conducted by UNAC. There's been some episodes of Shamba's Shape Up, sort of championing e-cooking. And onto the final slide, the final area, please. The supply chain. So, how can we improve the supply chain for e-cooking? How can we get large volumes of e-cookers into the country and being used? And what are the roles of all the key players in that? And one really key piece of this is, of course, finance. So both on the investment side, how do we get more capital into the e-cooking sector? And on the consumer side, so what financial mechanisms can make e-cooking more affordable for consumers and for cooks? So pay-go, on-bill financing, and of course, what's the role of carbon? What's the role of carbon finance in the e-cooking sector? Onto the final slide, please. So in Uganda, there's been great progress and great work from the partners, from the key players that we have here on all these different pieces of the jigsaw, especially on the enabling environment and on consumer awareness and consumer preferences, the research. The supply chain now is really the bottleneck, the missing piece. So how can we work together to scale electric cooking? And that's what we're going to be talking about. And as Simon explained, we do believe we've reached a tipping point in the off-grid context, but we still need all of these jigsaw pieces in place for when that tipping point really is reached.
Thank you, Will. When I was working with my team last year and we were having a team meeting, I actually created a jigsaw with all these little icons, and then they sat them around in tables and tried to get them to assemble it. And because it was only the icons, it was actually quite difficult to do. I noticed actually that our panel have chosen to sit in exactly the sequence that Will was describing, which is great. Peter, you can probably slide across now and use the middle microphone, please. Or Agnes, come one this way. Because we have Patrick from the regulatory authority, so enabling environment. We have Justine from the ministry. Then we have Peter from the utility, who's beginning to step into that consumer awareness supply chain space. Agnes from CREEC, the University of Makerere, and has done some fantastic work on consumer, on making sure, when we first started talking about electric cooking, everybody went, oh yeah, but I like my matoke to taste of charcoal or to be slightly burnt. So she's done some fantastic work testing Ugandan recipes and making sure that they are taste quality. And then we have Meredith from Burn, Burn are over in Kenya, but are beginning to supply devices into Uganda and have intention to supply. And then Kato from PowerUP, who has been really exploring the whole sort of carbon Internet of Things. So, having taken their thunder, I'll come back to Patrick and start with the enabling environment.
Simon, sorry, just to interrupt very quickly. I can also remove the projector.
Oh yes,
it is,
let's pause
okay?
for a moment.
Because
yeah, let's do that.
On the faces of the panelists.
Okay.
And then you can sit more comfortably. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Keep me on my toes. So Patrick, you've been thinking about e-cooking for a while, and you took the bold step of the e-cooking tariff. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your thinking process?
Thanks so much, Simon. The thinking process is that the Electricity Regulatory Authority is charged with regulation and generally promotion of the electricity supply industry to ensure that the industry grows. Now, this industry grows when there are three major factors: when there is supply, when there is demand, and when there is an enabling regulatory environment. Now, a regulatory environment includes both issues of reliability, issues of pricing, affordability and reasonableness of the tariff, and also ensuring that the customer service is generally at acceptable levels. Now, electricity, for the industry to grow, it means that electricity has to be generated and electricity has to be consumed. We have come from a background where the growth in electricity demand is natural. A consumer chooses how much electricity, first of all, chooses whether to get connected or not, chooses how much electricity they want to consume, and chooses on what to use the electricity for. But we operate in an environment where the physical environment and sustainability of the environment, and specifically climate mitigation, cannot be taken out of the discussion of regulation. Now, it was incumbent upon the regulator to ensure that electric cooking becomes mainstream in the electricity use in the country for two major reasons. First reason is demand growth. The second reason is what is it that we can contribute to conservation of the environment. And then, because we know that customers have choices, customers have the ability and the power to choose whether to cook using electricity or not cook using electricity. So how do we ensure that we make it convenient for the customer to make a decision on their choices? One, the major driver for an economic decision is cost saving. You're either introducing a new cost to the customer, or you're actually giving a customer a cost saving on what they have already been spending. The advantage we have is that for electric cooking, every customer has already been cooking. Now, how successful you become in helping the customer make a choice of transition from electric cooking to biomass to electric cooking is by making sure that the customer has cost advantages, cost benefits of this transition, and also ensuring that the customer knows that these benefits exist in addition to the many other benefits that are related with the transition from biomass to electric cooking. So that was the thought process, and then the issue is, what do we do after having that thought process? I'm not very sure that you allow me to go into it now, or at a later stage.
Yeah, now go on, carry on.
Yeah, now after having that conversation, that one, when we grow demand, it will actually help us to manage the tariff. Because when you invest in a generation capacity, and you also invest in evacuation and distribution capacity, the issue is that investment in these capacities is not modular. It's not fully modular to an extent that if you installed 200 megawatts today, or you put up a 220 kV network today, that there will always be adequate demand to actually correspond with that investment. Now, then if you have an investment and you do not have use, you do not have utilization, you do not have demand, then it means that you have sunk costs and you have costs which are not being recovered. What is the implication? That the few users, the few units that are being sold, will actually be the ones to amortize that investment. So you end up with a high cost per unit, you end up with a high tariff. So for us to be able to do tariff management, then we had to grow demand. But from the other perspective of incentivizing the customer to make a choice, then we had to say, well, we know that we need to recover the costs from the tariff, but we also know that we cannot have a customer making a rational choice if they do not see these direct benefits. So the first thing that we worked on as a regulator is to say, even within the constraints of cost recovery, even when we have pressures that would not ordinarily have allowed us to have a lower tariff or to maintain the tariff where it is, can we have a special incentive aligned to electric cooking that we can offer to the customers? And then the first thing we did was, we thought, is there a way we can actually price the electricity for cooking separately? And we found that we do not have any technology, and we tried really to talk to many vendors and to explore whether there is a technology that can actually be able to separate electricity for cooking from the rest of the electricity. And up to now, we have not had that success. Of course, recently we also came to learn that when it comes to equipment, you can actually have equipment that are remotely monitored, and you can be able to have this electric cooking equipment actually telling you how much power is being used for cooking, and you can segregate. But before that, we said that, well, this equipment may not have proliferated into the market, but we still have to make an incentive. So we made a study and established the average consumption of households, and we said, if this average is going to increase, we have to give an incentive for people who consume above this threshold, for them to be able to enjoy the lower tariff at domestic customer category level. And therefore we introduced what we call the e-cooking tariff, or which in Uganda shillings is 412, which is about 12 US cents, compared to about 20 US cents that the rest of the domestic users pay. Now, of course, we have received a number of questions on how it works exactly, and if given a chance later, we can go deeper into how it works, but we have a tariff. Now, for every month, a domestic customer is given up to 80 units from zero on a normal tariff, subject to to another tariff we call a lifeline tariff for a specific category of domestic customers. But generally, for the average customer, you have up to 80 units to consume at a normal tariff. Then from 80 to 150 units, you are given, in a month, you're given the units at a cooking tariff, which is 412 Uganda shillings. Then beyond 150, you go back to the normal tariff. And the reason why all that was done was for purposes of tariff management and ensuring that as we pilot, we are still in control of recovering the revenue requirement that we need to have the service run. But also to mitigate against what we call moral hazard. That if I have a tailoring business, a garment business, and I have a bakery, I shouldn't get incentivized now to shift my consumption from either commercial or medium industrial customer, and I come and connect it for home use. So we estimated that there is a limit to which a home can actually grow their consumption. There is still a lot of work to be done on whether the threshold should be 80, and whether the package should be 70 units, and whether the 412 shillings tariff is cost competitive compared to what people are spending on biomass. Although we tried to do a study, and at that point it made sense. But all this is work in progress. But the most important thing is that it was a strong signal that as a regulator, we are committed to ensure that households are enabled to make what we consider the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very clear. I said that we're gonna hear the Ugandan on-grid story, but in the second half of our workshop, we're gonna try and relate that to the off-grid environment. So I want to just draw attention to a number of things that I caught that Patrick said. Affordability, of course, but also that point about not having a modular, you can't just install one little dam here and one little dam here. You know, it suddenly have to jump in with the Karuma Dam and you know, several megawatts, and then you've got a plan for that. And you know, there's some parallels there with mini grids, but solar home systems are a bit more modular. So maybe there's a difference there that we could discuss. This whole idea of data. Patrick was looking at what was the average consumption. I'm sure Peter will speak more to that. And then trying to choose the tariff to fit there, and yet at the same time constraining and limiting the abuse of that cheaper tariff. So there's a number of things there that we can debate in the second half about how does that relate to the off-grid sector. Justine, please, from the Ministry of Energy and Mines. Is it and Mines? Yes.
And mineral development.
Minerals, that's the word I
yes.
keep forgetting, sorry.
Thank you very much. Cooking takes a large chunk of the energy that we consume, especially at the household level. The first thing you do when you wake up is to prepare a meal. The last thing you do, probably one of the last things you do before you go to bed, is to have a meal, which has been, of course, energy has been consumed. So what energy are you using to prepare your meals? The case of Uganda is not unique to that of sub-Saharan African countries. About 94% of our population is using firewood and charcoal to meet our cooking needs. However, the use of inefficient cooking technologies emits smoke, which causes smoke and particulate matter and black carbon that causes indoor air pollution, and has been associated with acute respiratory illnesses and taking a chunk of people's household health bills. Another thing is when people are cooking with these inefficient cooking solutions, there's time wasted, time that would have been used for productive activities. You have to spend time tending to your, to your meal as it's being prepared. Another thing is because we are using inefficient cooking solutions, we are overutilizing them, causing a heavy burden on our environmental stock. Cooking has been associated with deforestation in the country, and that has to change. Our message is cooking does not have to kill, cooking does not have to have a negative impact on the environment. Henceforth, what is the government's perspective on that? Our target is to reduce the amount of biomass that is used for cooking, because at this rate, we will not have enough stock. Our biomass stocks will be depleted within a couple of decades. But also, we have efficient cooking solutions on the market right now, which are affordable, which are accessible, and which are reliable to a sense. Henceforth, our target and our policy, which is borne by our energy policy, is to promote the use of alternative cooking solutions and also reduce the overutilization of biomass for cooking. Yes, so when we look at alternative cooking solutions, we have very ambitious targets. One of them is to increase the access of clean cooking solutions from a baseline of 15% to 50%, and also to reduce the overconsumption of biomass from about 90% of the energy mix to 50%. Now, where does e-cooking come in? We have the opportunity, we have the advantage in Uganda that our electricity is generated from renewable sources. Henceforth, we have a renewable grid. Another thing is we have efficient cooking solutions on the market, such as electric pressure cookers, induction cookers, which are highly efficient and as has been documented. When you compare the energy utilized to cook with these efficient solutions, it is more or less at par with that when you're using charcoal, in terms of cost as well. We have these solutions in the market, so our approach is to ensure that we have consumption, utilization of these clean cooking solutions. Another advantage that Uganda has is we have sufficient electricity, availability of electricity in the country. Government of Uganda has invested heavily in increasing electricity generation and access through rural electrification. And with that, we want to rely on that infrastructure to provide a sustainable, solution for, cooking. Henceforth, we want to promote cooking with electricity and looking at unique, interventions. For instance, as we promote, grid extension and grid access, can we also tag that along with promoting cooking solutions? Henceforth, in order to do that, we need an enabling environment, and the environment is born by the policy. The policy is encouraging, and it's encouraging the private sector to invest and supply these cooking solutions. Another thing is providing accessible financing, not just financing through the ordinary financing mechanisms, but unique mechanisms that can provide affordable capital for the private sector to invest in the supply chain, but also for the public, because if you compare the cost of, and maybe that's the reason as to why we still have a heavy reliance on biomass. The cooking technologies, for instance, of an improved cook stove may cost about $5. Compare that with an efficient cooking electric pressure cooker that might go for about $40 US. So how can we incentivize the public to and actually address that high upfront cost to, rather than it being a barrier, but break that barrier and ensure that we can provide cooking solutions for them. The focus is also to provide affordable financing for the public to access electricity. But how are we going to achieve that? Because we have seen that cooking is, you can cook efficiently with electricity. We have technology available in the market. So what is government strategy? We are developing a national strategy that will help us achieve clean cooking with electricity as part of the integrated cooking strategy. For instance, where we have high grid access within urban parts of the country, and where and the same areas have grid stability and a high quality of the electricity that is is being provided. How can we prioritize and strategize and ensure that this population within the urban parts, such as the Greater Kampala metropolitan area, can switch to clean cooking, e-cooking specifically within the next 5 years? So with that, we are developing a national strategy to help us come with clear targets, but also to understand the enabling policy. What's the tax structure like? Is it adequate enough to support the private sector to invest in providing these appliances? But also, what's the, as we provide e-cooking appliances, can we support local manufacture? Because we do not want to substitute something that is locally produced with something that we're importing. So what is the strategy to ensure that within the long term, we can have local manufacture? Right now, the current enabling policy is that if you do some local assembly, it is more affordable, you won't incur the taxes, but in the long run, how can we support the private sector to have local manufacture of these appliances in order to ensure their availability and reliability? So with the development of the national strategy, that will actually help us understand how we can ensure that we have clean cooking, specifically with electricity, but also understand what additional incentives we can put in place. Patrick has spoken about the e-cooking tariff for the for the final end user. How can we also introduce e-cooking at the institutional level? For instance, because firewood consumption, especially in schools, accounts for a huge chunk. Our assessments show that about 20% of the school's overheads go into procuring firewood. How can we change that and provide an e-cooking solution for institutions and also education institutions and also, for instance, prisons? So the strategy is going to help us achieve that, and hopefully within hopefully when we come here, we will have very good results to show regarding increased access to e-cooking solutions. But the other advantage and opportunity that e-cooking brings, sorry not to talk about that, I know there's another session, but we're also seeing the opportunity for e-cooking beyond the grid. In the off-grid settings, we are now seeing innovative solar manufacturers producing solar equipment, solar cooking solutions, which can actually speak to rural communities. We have a population of rural communities that do not procure firewood. They can pick it from their backyard. So if you're bringing them an e-cooking solution that requires them to buy electricity on a daily basis, that might be a barrier. But now when you come in with solar cooking, one doesn't have to incur that cost. And we're seeing an opportunity that we will utilize. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Justine. So one of the advantages of COVID was that we all learned how to do Teams and webinars. And one of the advantages of the webinar was that it was always recorded. So here we have two eloquent talks that were brilliant, and yet we haven't recorded them. And it's such a shame, because I'm just sitting here thinking, oh man, I want to put this in front of FCDO and, you know, the powers that be. Anyway, never mind. Peter, we're now going to come to you. So thank you. Yeah, and you've made the link through to the off-grid sector as well. Yes, and you were talking about Kampala itself. I mean, that's my go-to place. I always talk about, you know, Kampala has 90-something% of households connected to a good, strong grid, and yet 64% of them are still using charcoal. You know, in a country where your charcoal resources are really going down. 16% in 2016, 9% 2006, and then 9% in 2016, and goodness knows what it is now. But yeah, Peter, please. Peter is from Umeme.
Thank you. I think my colleagues have shared the big numbers, so I won't go through the big numbers. But the ministry and ERA are the utilities regulators, so they've given the voice of where government stands as far as e-cooking is concerned. Now that voice is very clear, very in support of e-cooking. We have to understand that the utilities now have to provide a bundle of services. It's not just the kilowatt. Umeme supports over 1.7 million customers, and these are the customers in addition to the customers that need access to e-cooking. This is not to say that e-cooking has not been happening. E-cooking has been happening, but in an inefficient manner. So what we've been having have been the open air cooking, which makes cooking with electricity expensive. What that then means is that a lot of the people cannot afford e-cooking because most of the energy is wasted, and that leads to increased bills. So we've had, as a country, we've had very lean years when we did not have enough energy access, when we did not have enough capacity. But in the last few years, with government investment, we have enough energy to supply to customers. So in the lean years, when we did not have enough energy, when we had shutdowns, I don't think it was very fashionable to promote cooking with electricity then. The culture has also been among the customers, or the thinking, that cooking with electricity is very, very expensive and unaffordable. So when a customer then drops into the office and he has a huge bill, when he's complaining, he would be saying, I do not cook with electricity. How come my bill is this high? Or at times, it would be the reverse, that the customer comes in, his bill is big, and you're also asking him, are you cooking with electricity? What happens then is that it becomes collective culture and understanding that cooking with electricity is expensive. And that then made that we have very low levels of cooking with electricity. What were the alternatives? we know the alternatives. Charcoal prices have been going up, forests have been depleting, and our kids are getting sick because of the smoke. As a service provider who deals directly with the customers, it was an opportunity. But when did this all change? A lot of good work has already been done or had already been done by the regulator, by the ministry, but by research partners, including MEX and CREEC. So one day, a report comes to Umeme from CREEC and MEX that actually indicated for the first time that cooking with electricity, especially using an EPC, was actually cheaper than using charcoal. We could not actually believe what the report was saying. How can cooking with electricity be cheaper than using charcoal? It gave us an opportunity to check that out. Out of that, working with our partners who are on this table and others behind, like Enaguru, I know Enaguru is in the room, we decided then to put together a pilot, also supported by Access to Energy Institute for M&E. We decided to put together a pilot to actually try out what that report had shared, that cooking with electricity is cheaper than charcoal. Who would not want to prove that out? Who would not want to have a cleaner alternative to charcoal that even saves the environment? So from that point, I've been working on a pilot, a collaborative pilot, understanding that while the harvest is big, no one partner is going to do it alone. We'll have to work together. We've been putting together a pilot, which is getting close to implementation, to see how we can provide EPCs, electric pressure cookers, closer to the customers, as well as supporting the players that are already in the sector, including Up Energy, including Enagro, and others, while working with the partners that are available. Because at the end of the day, an EPC that goes into somebody's home is going to help in very many areas, including saving money, leaving money in the customer's wallet, saving our health, improving our health, increasing convenience because of the automation, increasing the productivity, again because of the automation, as well as supporting the government agenda on demand stimulation, given that we have more electricity now than we had in the lean years. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, I confess I'm not very good at timekeeping. That was partly because Patrick was so interesting, I wanted to let him run a bit. But thank you very much. But Agnes, please tell us a little bit about that research that showed cost savings.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Justine, for providing a bit of background on what has happened in Uganda regarding the cooking energy sector. I'll talk a little bit about the history of how we are at this point, especially in Uganda when it comes to cooking. This journey started around 2019, and thanks to Mr. Barnabe and Simon that linked. Okay, is that better? Okay. Yeah, started around 2019 to kind of understand what's the feasibility of cooking with electricity in Uganda. Like Peter's already mentioned, the narrative in Uganda has been that it's expensive to cook with electricity. So a lot of the work that CREEC Center for Research in Energy and Energy Conservation has done has been to kind of understand, is it actually possible to cook with electricity in Uganda? So we've done several studies, starting with a discrete choice modeling study in 2019, that kind of just wanted to understand perspectives and perceptions and what people commonly used to cook and what are their perceptions. And this led into so many different studies, way into 2020, where we did a comparative study across technologies, across the different meals, local meals that we commonly cook in Uganda, looking at matoke, the meals that you will find typically, maybe on your plates that you had for lunch today, testing them with different technologies that we commonly use in Uganda, but also introducing the electric appliances, including the EPC. And the outputs of that study were shared during a webinar during the lockdown with different stakeholders, where we had government, different stakeholders, users, Umeme was still part of that, and we shared these findings, and they were very interesting findings because they actually proved that it's possible to cook with electricity, and that's something that was not really, it was not known in Uganda because we are always using hot plates and that kind of thing. So this study really sparked a lot of interest, and it also sparked a path for a lot more studies being done at CREEC, just to really understand where we had understood the lab part, the technology part, using different cooks, cooks to understand cooking and across technologies. But now we wanted to also further understand, okay, this is the lab, this is us sitting in the office and trying to figure out these things. What are communities saying? If we introduce these things within communities and try to understand perspectives, use them over long term, would perceptions actually change? So over the course of 2020, 2021, we had long-term studies, understanding these perceptions, understanding are people actually willing to change? Would perceptions change over time? And so we have a series of studies that are open access and available on the MEX website, and we are really grateful to MEX for providing that opportunity in the country for us to do the studies as CREEC, but to provide an evidence-based research that has greatly informed, for example, the eCooking tariff at ERA, that was a great input into what Umeme is currently doing, work at MEMD, because these have provided data that proves that, it's actually possible, but how do we get there? So part of that is really the process that's happening right now. How do we get to the point of scaling up and understanding the supply chain? But in terms of is it actually feasible technically, it is. The households that we've worked with during some of these studies, and they're actually still using these technologies that we introduced to them, say, 2 years ago, and many of them actually are still using these technologies. They've influenced a lot more of their neighbors and people that visit them to actually use these technologies. And we are continuously seeing a growth in the demand for modern eCooking technologies, in particular the electric pressure cooker. It's been a bit of a learning process. We've collected data basically to understand with appliances there will be failures. Right now we're also building capacity at CREEC in terms of repair and maintenance, because once you introduce a person to something, they'll come back if it has a problem. So we also started to collect that information and understand, okay, once this market really rolls out and supply chains are clear, how are we going to manage issues that come up? So that's also something we're developing, and we are creating a database to understand what are the common things that commonly fail on eCooking appliances and the EPCs. And that's work in progress. We've further done research to understand one of the challenges a person will ask is, okay, if I decided to fully adopt eCooking, 100% eCooking, how much electricity will I use, or how much will I spend on cooking? So one of the studies we've done in collaboration with MEX was to work with households to just get them to just use 100% eCooking. One thing that we proved is that you can actually use 80% of our menu in Uganda. You can easily cook it on an EPC, but there are some that you can't cook, so maybe you would have to get a bit of, let's say, the induction cookers to do that. But from that study, we proved that averagely, actually, households use roughly 1 unit to cook all their meals, running from breakfast, lunch, and supper, to do their cooking in a day. And that is really, the cost of that, let's translate it to, let's say, roughly 1,000 Uganda shillings. In a typical household, if you're using charcoal, you're going to use, people buy, let's say, charcoal for 2,000 a day or 3,000 a day. And that clearly shows us that you're likely to save over 50% when it comes to cooking with charcoal. And some of the back-end calculations we've made roughly to estimate, typically people use charcoal for cooking. So if someone just decided to transition to eCooking, you have a payback period, because we understand that technologies are expensive upfront. But the payback period we've roughly calculated is roughly 3 to 4 months, which is a really good target considering people actually likely spend over 1.2 million Uganda shillings buying fuel for cooking in Uganda. So it's been a lot of learning. We've had studies where we are understanding how did people learn how to cook. We are learning, we have a study that's running to understand battery-powered e-cooking, because with time, like how a lot of this discussion has gone on off-grid. Okay, eventually to get to that, what are the studies? What are studies telling us about battery-powered e-cooking? Yeah, I could go on and on, but I think let me pause.
Yes, I know. I realised I made a mistake because I invited too many speakers and we have so much information amongst ourselves. Never mind. But that's a great segue. I mean, you were talking about, you know, repair and maintenance, and we come to a supplier, Meredith. Please tell us your situation.
Yeah, so at Burn Manufacturing over the years, we've been known for making wood and charcoal stoves. And right now we're at the point where we're starting to begin to roll out an electric cooking product line. And this consists of electric pressure cookers and induction cookers. And just echoing everything they've said today, what we've seen is in most urban cities in sub-Saharan African countries, close to 75% of the population, urban population, still use biomass fuel. So they either use charcoal or firewood as their primary cooking fuel. And electricity is really cheap and accessible within these cities. So I'm going to focus on the 5 lessons that we've seen at Burn through the e-cooking pilots that we've done so far, mainly in Kenya and Tanzania. So one thing I will repeat, as I said, it is cheap. And how cheap it is? We saw a 55% reduction in the weekly fuel budget when a household moved from primarily cooking with charcoal to cooking with electricity. So you're seeing them going from spending close to $13 a week in cooking fuel to spending $5. So these immense savings. And if you were to calculate that over a period of maybe 7 years, this household is saving over $2,000 just by switching from charcoal to cooking with electricity. Another lesson we've seen, or the second one, is on time savings. So in most households, especially in Africa, women are the primary cooks. And it does save them a lot of time. You don't need to spend time lighting the charcoal stove, preparing the fuel. You just press a button, wait 45 minutes, and your food is ready. And one interesting thing on the time savings, because I do spend a lot of time in the field visiting and talking to our customers, that I observed is most women, especially in Nairobi, do have a source of income. So they either have a salon or a shop that they run. And they would carry the pressure cooker or the induction cooker to their business. And as they are selling or doing work in their business, it's cooking in the back. So by the time they go home, they already have food ready for their family. So that's it's really difficult to quantify what that looks in time, but I can imagine you're able to multitask and save a lot and spend more time on your business just because of moving to cooking with electricity. Another third lesson is it is clean, it's zero emission. So the most immediate benefit that these women and children and households realize is that they no longer have headaches. Their children don't get as sick. So just by making that switch within the first week, your health is improving significantly because you're not inhaling a lot of smoke. And if you look at the setup in where these urban users live, it's really, they live in very tight spaces. So it could be a single-roomed house or a really tiny one-bedroom apartment. And you can imagine the amount of charcoal smoke they're inhaling by cooking in such a space and how electricity has really improved their health. Another fourth lesson, which I really find interesting, is since people are cooking more in electricity, men now want to cook in the kitchen because it's easy and it's clean. So we saw a 40% increase in the men participating in cooking activities than before we even, when they were using charcoal or firewood as their primary fuel. And then to speak onto the side of energy, it does create lots of demand stimulation for the grid. So for most of the households that we've worked with or distributed the cook stoves, they've doubled pretty much their electricity consumption. So if they were consuming 30 or 40 kilowatt hours per month, they are now consuming 60 or 80, which is good. for those who are distributing and generating power. So there's a lot of demand stimulation by moving people towards cooking with electricity. And two things I'd like to point out about now scaling this solution to be more affordable and more accessible within these urban areas that are grid connected is to think about how we could leverage carbon finance, as we've done so for our biomass stoves, to subsidize the cost of electric cook stoves, and at the same time have cheap and accessible end-user financing mechanisms to enable them to purchase these stoves. So there's so much you can do in terms of the subsidy, but also it will still be too expensive for them. So how we could have a lot of asset financing that could go into that space as well.
Thank you very much, Meredith. You set us up again for a good discussion. Kato, can I give you 6 minutes maximum, and I'll interrupt if you go over 6 minutes, because then we should all get up and do the 8-second part of the exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kato, Kibuka, CEO of PowerUP. PowerUP is also a supplier of electric cooking devices. Focuses on electric pressure cookers at the moment. The examples have been very, very good about the savings and the benefits of cooking with electricity. I also want to again reiterate, every time you cook with an efficient electric cooker, you save money. And that has to be an efficient electric cooker. Not all electric cooking devices are efficient. So we also need to keep that in mind. Electric pressure cookers, induction, rice cookers, even hot water kettles, those are efficient, where some other options are not as efficient. So PowerUP is supplying electric pressure cookers that are designed here in Kampala, and were optimized for the African market. We've been seeing that there are a lot of generic pressure cookers on the market that are cooking dishes that are not applicable here. So we've actually done the design here. If you cook half a kg of dry beans on charcoal in Kampala, you're spending around 900 shillings approximately. With EPCs, you're spending 420 shillings. So the difference in dollars is 24 cents, US cents, compared to 11 US cents. Every single time you cook with an efficient electric cooker, you're saving money. And that is the biggest value proposition. So what are we doing about, PowerUP is doing about electric cooking? We're exploring different levels of innovation. Some being on the product side, and others mainly being on the business side. From the product side, we've customized our device to cook local dishes and make it easy to use, so it can be adopted not only by the primary purchaser, but other participants in the household. We include things like pay-as-you-go technology that most of us are familiar with in solar into our pressure cooker. So that way the customer can pay it in installments and break down the high cost barrier. We also include a smart meter in our pressure cooker, so as the customer is cooking, they can see the amount of electricity that is being consumed. And we do this primarily to prove to the customer that it is cheaper. It's hard for someone to keep looking at the electric meter and doing the calculations to see, is this thing really cheaper than my charcoal? But at least having it right in front of your face, you can actually see, hey, these beans only consume 0.4 kilowatt hours. And I know that a unit is, let's say, approximately 1,000 shillings, so I've spent 400 shillings on this cooking session. So that's very powerful. In our pilots, we've seen that has really convinced people and shown other customer refers that this is actually going to be cheaper for them. The other area for innovation that we've been doing is around the business model. Being an electric cooking device, it brings a lot of advantages because now we can actually use a lot of technology built into the device. The key area that we've been focusing on is data. With data, this can unlock a lot of new forms of financing, subsidies, and other ways to potentially drop the cost of cooking in the long run. So for example, our device tracks exactly how the device is used, what buttons are pressed, and then the kilowatt hours every time you cook. And we can then accumulate that to see how many kilowatt hours are consumed in a month, in a year. That data is so powerful for this industry. It allows us, number one, to start exploring the carbon credit markets. In the carbon credit markets, we're seeing that data is going to be key for generating emissions reductions. The carbon credit markets are moving away from estimations, and they want to see the exact consumption of fuel. So in our PowerUP's new gold standard meter device methodology, we have to show consumption of fuel. So that's going to be a key point to generate carbon credits, and then we can use those carbon credits to subsidize that product, the product going forward, to make it even more affordable. Another area is getting concessional financing or grants to, again, further promote the use of electric cooking. Donors are looking for data as well. So if we can show that the device has not only been sold but been used, donors will actually be more willing to invest more in the effort when they're seeing the impact. So there's the people like A to the I who's done a lot of work on actually trying to collect this data and show that to donors and other third parties that these devices are being used. So that's another area of bringing in money into the sector. Lastly, to Patrick's point, with this data, we can now see this user actually used the product, and we can use that information shared with national grids, mini grids, to say that, listen, there's a lot of people using electricity. Maybe we should think about how to subsidize the cost of electricity on the grid or the mini grid. So again, these are areas that we're still very early days of exploring, but if we can get this data to the right people, whether it be the carbon markets, whether it be donors, whether it be the grids, we can actually continue to drive down the cost of electric cooking and actually improve the value proposition to the end user. So those are the things that we're doing right now. On the off-grid side, we're looking to deploy our products at mini-grid sites, but we can speak more about that since Simon is giving me the end.
Thank you very much. Except that Patrick has just whispered he wants 30 seconds to respond. So, sorry, yes, give him an applause, please. Thank you. Patrick, yes. 30 seconds.
As I already highlighted, that one of the problems we struggled with at the beginning was how to actually have segregated data for energy use for electric cooking. And I'm thinking that the use of, if I can call it smart metering, that is embedded in electric equipment is actually one breakthrough that can be leveraged to price electric cooking data from the rest of electricity use. But what that would mean is that, one, that we need to signal to the market that we need to have more of this equipment with this smart meter, but also we need to have this meter and data within the control of utilities for us to be able to rely on it to price electricity for cooking appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, can I ask you all to stand up and push the chairs to the very back of the room so that there's an empty space here. Panelists, if you would like to walk around into this empty space. Right, thank you very much.
I saw you in Cairo.
So, in many sort of workshops, Dan, I'm going to call you out. Oi. Okay, just for the instructions, please listen carefully. So, in many workshops, we sort of say, oh, please put your hand up if you agree with this or don't agree with that. There was a wonderful example this morning when nobody in the room agreed with the speaker. But in this case, I want you to think of this as a scale. So that wall over there where Patrick is strongly agree with the statement. I will make a statement, then I want you to walk, if you strongly agree with it, walk up that end of the room. If you strongly disagree, it's that wall, okay? And stand over there. And you can choose the space in between. So if you've got no strong opinion, stand in the middle, or is clear? Right. You actually go where.
So sitting in the face is standing in the middle.
Yes. Okay, so we've heard the story about the utility and the grid mechanism, right? And right at the end, Kato said about using electric pressure cookers with mini grids. My first statement is, I'll make it a statement so that you can strongly agree and strongly disagree. It is cost effective to use electric pressure cookers with mini grids. Please stand. It's a difficult question, but it's purposely difficult. All right, great. We've got a range of opinions. So, Thomas, you very strongly walk down this end of the disagree room. Why?
Well, I think it depends on the tariff of the mini grid, but if you look at the usual tariffs of $1 or more than $1 per unit, then the calculations which you just heard on the panel totally don't make sense, right? So the tariff is at 20 cents, maybe makes sense, right? But not at a permanently expensive price.
Okay, thank you, fair enough. We do actually have a piece of research from Tanzania that shows that an EPC, even at $1 a kilowatt hour, was saving customers money. But you came down this end, Peter.
I agree that it is cost effective because the cost is more than monetary. If we only look at the monetary aspect, it might be expensive if the tariff is high. But if you add the non-monetary benefits, if you look at it from the customer's point of view, the health benefits we're talking about, it's cost effective. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Patrick wants to say.
Yeah, thanks. And I wish I had read that study before we had to make this this decision. Yeah, I find it interesting because so far we're talking about, let's say, the unit price of what it might cost to cook a meal, for example. But I think when we talk about mini-grid design, we have to consider the behavioral time of use, basically. And if it proves that everybody's using it in the evening hours, of course it inflates the cost of the mini-grid, increases the storage, and therefore maybe I need to shift over a little bit more to this angle as I'm speaking. But just to say, I'm not entirely on the cost-effective side, but I think the cost of the mini-grid as a full design, battery storage and all that, needs to be taken into account.
But Simon, can you shed some light on the $1? How can it be more affordable to cook with $1 per kilowatt?
Just in Tanzania, in their particular island context where charcoal was just hugely expensive.
Very specific.
Yeah, everything's context specific. Yeah, and it's a complex system. Just for your information, we're currently running a challenge fund where we've asked, so the feedback we got on mini grids was it's difficult to add eCooking to an existing mini grid, but it should be very easy to add it to a new mini grid because it's about what you were saying about battery storage and sizing things. So at the moment we're running a challenge fund. There are 8 mini-grid developers who are doing business planning with and without e-cooking so that they can then move on to the next stage of actually building the mini-grid. So, let me, yes please.
Yeah. From my experience with the pricing of mini-grid is that what is the major reason why a mini-grid price is high in the first place? It's because of the low usage.
Yes.
So, if we can incorporate, I'm now arguing from the perspective that has been given, if we can incorporate the demand from electric cooking into design of mini-grid, most probably we should be able to reduce we should be able to reduce the price of mini-grid by even more than 40%. Why am I saying that? If you look at the average consumption of a mini-grid customer, it's going to be probably less than 20 units a month. Now, if you're able to have a mini-grid in an area where people are already spending on maybe charcoal or firewood and not having it free of charge, then you're very sure that if a person is able to use half a unit every day, it means that you're increasing consumption by about 15 units every month. And what implication does it have on the tariff? Now, when it comes to storage, we have seen that with pressure cookers, you have a flexibility of actually having people cook out of the peak time, when probably the solar is at the peak, because with the changing behaviors, you can actually be able to cook at lunch or at midday. Some of these pressure cookers, you can actually do a setting and even cooks by itself when you're out of home. It means that you can also reduce on storage for your electric cooking needs. So I think at the design, we can actually incorporate them and bring this type forward.
Thank you, Patrick. That's what I would have liked to have said, and so that's great. And
thank you very much. I think I may disagree with my colleague Patrick at some point, because when you're looking at the target beneficiaries or users of mini-grids, are normally the rural dwellers. These are the people that occasionally or maximize firewood, not even charcoal. So you're telling someone who has not been spending a single penny on cooking to start investing tremendous amounts of money buying electricity. I think that might be a bit tricky. And also, by nature, most of the Africans are a bit, the most rich are the rural dwellers. Telling them go off firewood, they love the aroma of wood. I think that it might actually be easier for adoption of e-cooking in urban centers, because the levels of exposure are also high. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get later with Patrick and we disagree or agree later.
Thank you. I do agree that every context is specific and that it is more difficult if the people are not already paying for it. But where's Agnes? I want you to address the smoky flavour.
Yeah, so we've had, and I'll use the perspective of people that have actually continuously used the EPC, and many times we find, let's say, the elderly, our mothers that are above 50 years and above are the ones that really are using matoke and cooking matoke a lot. It's like their daily delicacy. But we have case studies, examples of people that are actually using the EPC, and they actually put the matoke in the banana leaves, and they will eat their meal from that, and they're not really cooking anymore with firewood. Around the beginning of this year, no, towards the end of last year, we had a focus group discussion where we had elderly ladies, mothers, and we basically just discussed about their perspectives and told them about the EPC, showed these things. And what came out strongly was the fact that they said, you know what, right now it's about convenience. This one was very particular and said, right now I prefer something that makes my life easy, so I may not worry so much about the flavor. So you have varying perceptions, but in terms of that, some have easily adopted to using this with the EPC to actually cook their matoke. So
where are you in the middle?
That was on mini-grid. Right, let me try hang on. Let me try a different question or a different statement. Oh, I've got hands from James and Herbert. I don't know what to do now. All right, go on in.
Thanks, Simon. No, I just wanted to say, I think you said a question and then answered it, and that's why the reason I'm in the middle. Because you talked about the challenge.
Yeah.
This is very context. Yes, so if the mini-grid is already existing, then we are losing the cost effectiveness. But if we include it in the design, I think then you achieve the cost effectiveness.
Thank you, Simon. I just wanted to make an observation that the rural areas, things have changed. We no longer have plenty of firewood. even charcoal is a big challenge. I just came from the village over the weekend, and the people were asking me to help. Well, I have some trees, so they were asking me to help with this kind of fuel. So I think where we are heading, let's have that in mind. Is it going to be cheaper to access charcoal or firewood?
Thank you.
Simon, I think, and this is each because that side has given their position. The reason why current mini-grids will need to be redesigned to accommodate cooking tells you why it is going to be hard to cook on a mini-grid. Because that will come, and we don't know what will come with that challenge campaign of fund. Is that we are going to have extra investments to accommodate cooking that will even escalate the current rates or tariffs of the mini-grid. If you're talking about 29 today, if you introduce cooking, it could go to 43. So I don't know how it will become cheaper. So that's what I think, because the extra, why can't the current designs cook? Why are we looking at redesigning? It's partly an expenditure that would raise the capex and make cooking harder. You disagree?
You need to.
Yeah, I'm afraid I disagree as well. Hang on, Patrick, first.
I wanted to answer why I was in the middle. It's the fact that we are still doing a research to ascertain a lot of these things. So I'm kind of here. So that's why I'm not sure.
Should we close?
I want to just throw one more spanner in the works here, because when we talk about cost effectiveness, of course, it's a question of for whom. And I was just, let's say, inspired by the comment just made now that if we look at it from an individual perspective, of course, maybe the arguments can be made, I think, quite soundly, but maybe from an economic perspective, macroeconomic perspective, from a government perspective, the question could be asked, if we're trying to achieve SDG 7 by 2030, the additional subsidy that's required to operate mini-grids, which we know exists today, I don't think there's any commercial mini-grids in the world, or I would be volunteering to see a paper which finds purely private, no subsidy mini-grid that's economically advantageous. Could those investments, could those subsidies from the government perspective not be better spent on other solutions to achieve SDG 7 on a lower tier for cooking? That would be one cost-effective question I would ask the audience.
I think we're being too pessimistic about the opportunity that we have, because we already have carbon financing in the eCooking space. It's on the grid, possibly in the mini-grid sector. Why can't we think more creatively about how we can incentivize consumers through a time of use incentive, whereby if we already have carbon financing in that program, they can get a kickback every time they use it at a certain point in time that is not at within the hour, where within the period of the day where it will put a lot of stress on the mini-grid. So we have that open white space to be creative about how we can do it in a sustainable way, without saying that we're going to kill the mini-grid, and especially for existing mini-grid sites. And we can, obviously, with new sites coming in, it will even be easier once we already have carbon financing into the play.
Simon,
Yeah.
why is he in the middle?
Sorry?
Why is he in the middle?
Why is he in the middle?
Because of the context. He didn't mention that people.
Okay, well, no, this is a fantastic discussion, so I don't really want to cut it off, but I do want to try one more question, actually to stretch the mind even further. So we were talking about grid with its 20 cents tariff, mini grid with its 40 to 60 cent tariff, solar home systems, right? So my statement is, e-cooking can be cost effective. I take all your points about all the other benefits and whatever, but I'm going to stick with the phrasing, cost effective. Solar home, e-cooking can be cost effective on solar home systems. Today.
Kind is the potential,
Agree? Disagree? Please move. Oh, not the mini grid people are moving. Still there. Thanks. Right, Meredith, you're strongly disagree. Why is that?
Well, I timing, it would need a lot of innovation from my perspective, that's what I would think, around making either the solar home system to support the amount of power that eCooking device would need. I mean, the EPC is the most efficient because it only draws on about 1,100 watts, but I'm not sure if the home system can support eCooking plus lighting plus a TV or whatever else the person wants to add to their home. And that would mean additional investment on the part of the owner of the solar home system as well, to the customer. So it would be bearing down so many expenses. I think it would be quite expensive for them as well. Yes, they're not paying for the power, but just acquiring that entire suite of product and maintaining it. Right now, it looks very expensive.
Nodding your head vigorously.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States in the summer we buy ice cream from ice cream trucks, and the ice cream is quite cheap, but you now have to sell somebody an entire truck to operate it, and that's kind of the, I think, the metaphor that Meredith is describing, right? The CapEx investment is quite significant when you're talking about the level of storage I think you'd need. Maybe you'll tell us different.
Maybe, but I'll come down this end first. Justine is nodding her head.
A big if. If you address that upfront cost, and I think that's where government incentives and interventions come in, by providing things like asset financing, affordable, debt, to buy down that cost. I've seen a solar cooking system in Uganda, off-grid, that is working. The only disadvantage is that upfront cost. But where you have, asset financing or breakdown, or even introduce PayGo, you can actually break down that barrier and make it more cost-effective.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yeah, I agree, purely because the statement was that it can be cost-effective. Currently, it looks a bit difficult, but I think with innovation and creativity, certainly I believe there's a way in which cooking can be cost-effective using solar home systems. There need to be more demand, there need to be more of an intentional effort, but it's certainly possible. So that's why I agree.
For me, I agreed because considering the investment, it is possible to come up with a solar home system that can power a cooker within the homestead. But what it means when you go to economics, such projects will require a payback period, which is a bit longer. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is not cost reflective. It will be cost reflective, right? But you just have to give it adequate time, commensurating with the investment amount that you have incurred.
Right, thank you. There is promise, but again, promise premised on some of the arguments that have been advanced. If this is a strategy that you wish to promote, then government will have to incentivize to do away with that upfront cost barrier. And then naturally the private sector will also have to intervene to ensure that there's more innovation in terms of efficiency and then development of the market, and that would work hand in hand with government efforts. That said, there is also the benefit of the other values that would be gained in terms of productivity, enhancement, the time saved, and generally wellness and the quality of life, that if quantified would then translate into a sustainable saving that would, if plugged into this equation, would present a case to bring me closer to the other side. But as it stands now, there are a lot of ifs. But there is promise. If you decide to go that way, then we can make a push towards that.
On this side, because I generally have a problem with decentralized generation, especially in us.
Remember, you heard that from the regulator.
Especially from the point of view of load curve management. You imagine yourself, you see, I attempted to buy, I think some people here know there is an electric cooker that is solar driven. And I wanted to actually buy it for different reasons. including experimentation. Now, when you look at the cost of that cooker, whereas, okay, assuming it works very well and you are in a place with good radiation, most of the cost of that cooker is actually a cost for capacity. Now, when you look at a typical home cooks probably, let me stretch it, 4 hours a day. You are investing in a capacity that is going to be idle 24 hours a day. This capacity can actually be shared across the users. That's number one. Now, these users have different needs and consume power at different times of the day. Now, I need to be convinced that, for example, if I moved away from that cooker and I go to something you put on the rooftop, then you have to do conversion of power to AC, and then you have to store it. I initially stood there, but I actually even pulled further here. Whereas it can be possible, I think it is hard for me to make an argument based on what can be possible, including 1,000 years from now. So for me, the reason why I'm here is that currently we still have a lot of work to do. First of all, to demystify, but also to the extent that there will always be that capacity idling. I think that it can be used when it is the only alternative, but I would really think that it ranks very, very low on the cost effectiveness scale.
Thank you very much. So we've got 3 minutes left, and I'm going to use those to build on what Patrick said. Over in Cambodia, they are now mesh networking solar home systems for precisely that reason, so that one household can use the battery storage from the household over there. It's not a mini grid in the sense that it's not a mini grid developer who is, managing everything. This is using smart technology to just share power with different households when it's ready. Down in Malawi, you have a group that are working with women's groups, and I particularly like them because they started by just listening to the women's groups, what will make our lives easier. And they live in, important point, in an area, forest area, where they collect the wood. So the whole idea of e-cooking seemed very strange at the beginning. But interestingly, it's that capacity thing that is, has made it workable. Because the women's groups organized solar shops. Initially, they were selling lights, the equivalent of D-Light, although they actually assemble themselves, and there's an added advantage of jobs and everything. But then they were doing renting of solar pumps, because they said what we really need is water for the irrigation. But those require relatively large panels, and their capacity is not always used to the full extent. And so they introduced e-cooking, both with a homemade, highly insulated electric cooker, but also we now have a 24-volt DC electric pressure cooker coming out of China with all the safety features and everything. And just because they were listening about people's lives and works, actually they also created a little 3-wheel drive vehicle that, again, the women get the basic shell from China, but then they assemble all the electrics to make this electric car. It can only go, I think it's 5 kilometers, but it's enough, but it can carry half a ton. So it takes the goods to market, and then it literally has a solar cell on the top, charges, comes back again, yeah? And they're also even looking at solar-powered tillers for digging the ground. So I think the important point is, you're right, leverage that ecosystem and the capacity, start swapping batteries, and I think for me one of the synergies that we haven't really talked about is e-mobility and e-cooking, because There are e-mobility solutions that are about battery swapping, and those batteries would then be available to go into solar home systems. And then final point is across in India, they also are getting excited about solar home systems that can cook. But they have gone for the all-singing, I'm not sorry, I should have said down in Malawi, so a solar home system that can e-cook is $300. Now I know that $300 is still way too much for, you know, but if we can get rid of that upfront cost, $300 is less than a biogas plant. Biogas is sitting at $800, $900. Crossing India, they're going for the full works. 1 kilowatt of panel, massive energy storage, and a kilowatt induction stove. So Meredith, you were saying EPCs generally operate at 1 kilowatt. The Malawian DC EPC operates at 450 watts and has a separate button to drop it down to 250 watts for some types of cooking, long cooking. And in India, even that massive system comes in at about $800, but they are looking at it to support weak grids. It's very interesting. At the edges of their grid, they're suggesting that people actually use it so that they can cover the blackouts and the load shedding and everything. Okay, and I am just on 3:45, so I kind of recovered, although I was very bad at managing time in the beginning. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.